Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Wednesday drawing session with me, Frank Cho. There's my trusty Pentel mechanical pencil with zero point 0.7 HB millimeter lead and my kneaded eraser. And here's my favorite paper to draw on, Strathmore Bristolboard 300 series with vellum surface. Vellum surface has that kind of a tooth on the paper. It grips the pencil really well, which I really liked. So today I am going back to the comics. So at this point, I've drawn, I think, pretty much all the major X Men characters, except for, a few of them, like Iceman and stuff like that. So this week, I wanted to draw Storm, who is often the kind of like the co-leader of the X Men. Cyclops was always the leader, but eventually Cyclops stepped down numerous times, and every time he stepped down or for whatever reason, Storm took over as the leader of the X Men, and actually she was actually a really good leader too. So Storm's background is kind of an odd background. So I grew up reading comics in 1983 to 1990 roughly, and then I skipped about 5 6 years. That's when I went to college, and I didn't pick up comics until like 1996. And so I have like a 5 6 year period where I had a very limited access to comics. So and I pretty much missed the entire image revolution. So I was actually kind of like confused when I came back to comics. Everyone was trying to draw like Jim Lee and Todd McFarlane. So that was a very rude awakening, because I was a big John Buscema, Neil Adams, Don Newton, John Byrne, kind of fan, and then coming to where everything is now. Now everyone is trying to draw like Arthur Adam with a lot of speed lines and stuff like that. So it was kind of a rude awakening. Felt like Rip Van Winkle. So anyway, so so all of my X Men knowledge comes from the 80s, so from 1983 to 1990. So if I screw up, like please excuse me because I actually have like gaps in my comic knowledge, especially during the 90s and 2000. Actually, now I think about it, it's kind of funny. As I grew up, when I was growing up, I read everything. I literally read everything, especially when it came to Marvel. I didn't read too much DC Comics because DC Comics I thought were kind of boring. But Marvel Comics, I read everything in Marvel Comics. And so once I became a professional, it's kind of funny. I stopped reading less and less comics, and now I'm up to a point where I don't read comics anymore. And if I do read comics, I would just occasionally pick up the comic book, if they have like an interesting art, if it's like good art or interesting art that that would pique my interest, and I would buy it. But I haven't read. Gosh, at this point, I haven't read any Marvel comics since I left Marvel Comics back in, holy crap, 2014. So, wow. I mean, I would read collection books every now and then, but I haven't regularly read comic book since 2014. And I would sometimes read DC comics every now and then because I'm still working for DC. So anyway, so going back to Storm. So for this week's drawing, Storm, her mutant power is controlling weather. It's flight and controlling weather. So I want to put her in a kind of a flying pose, or actually she's hovering. So in the comic book, she tends to like float, fly up in the air as she starts to manipulate the weather. So that's what I want to draw. I kind of want her kind of up in the air, floating, with her hand out a little bit, just to kind of like testing the wind patterns and stuff like that, and with her cape kind of billowing behind her. So that's the pose that I have in mind. And once I have that pose, it's just basically drawing the figure. And now, so I really want to stress that you really have to know your anatomy. I mean, I can't, like people basically, like, how do you become a comic book artist? Learn your anatomy. Anatomy, composition, and perspective drawings, and just draw all the time until you get really used to it. So if you look at it, all my figure work tend to be in a very classical, heroic proportions. So the average human being is about 6.5 heads tall, and but the classical hero proportions are about 7 to 8 heads tall, usually about 8 heads tall, which is basically came directly from the Roman and Greek statues. Those tend to be about 7 heads tall, 7, 8 heads tall. So just having like a taller, a human being tend to be more. There's a certain heroic visual, proportion image to it. So when I draw comic books, all my figures tend to have like a classical heroic proportion, 7 to 8 heads tall. And I know people give me a lot of grief that I tend to make my women very curvy. Um, yeah, sue me. I like curvy women. I can't stand skinny women. Skinny women do nothing for me. So I tend to draw my women looking like women, with wide hips, Something about hips on the women just drives me crazy. So anyway, Storm has like a really interesting background, which I didn't know. So her real name is Aurora. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that right. Aurora Monroe. And her mother is a tribal princess from Kenya, and her dad is an African American photojournalist from America. So so she was actually raised in Harlem, which I did not know until recently, because when I was reading X Men, John Byrne and Claremont would always like show her childhood running around in Africa and Cairo, Egypt, as a pickpocket. So I didn't realize that Storm was actually born in Harlem, New York. So that was came as a big surprise to me. And I guess like most mutants, her mutant power blossomed during puberty. So when she was a kid, she was actually a pickpocket, working for like a small criminal boss in Cairo. And I think ultimately Professor X and the God, who was the guy? What was that guy? It was a big fat Egyptian guy with a fez. Um, Looked like something straight out of Indiana Jones. God, was it Shadow King or something like that? Well, I don't remember. So anyway, so when she ultimately became Storm, when she grew up and she became this the Weather Witch, and she was like worshipped as a goddess, and and I remember vividly that Storm was a nudist. So she would just walk around naked all day, which makes sense because Claremont writes it, because Chris Claremont always had like tend to be has a very I guess like a lot of fetish, sexual fetish kind of stuff to his writing, like the Hellfire Club, for example, is actually a real club in New York City back in the 70s. I think it was like a sex club. So anyway, which a lot of people don't know. So yeah, you have to be kind of yeah. If you pay close attention, Claremont tend to slip in a lot of stuff like that. So anyway, Storm was a weather witch in Africa, and I always assumed that she was a mutant, and 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 basically like a lot of writers would come in and start changing stuff. Well, it turned out Storm actually has like a magical background. So she comes from, not only is she a mutant, she may not be a full mutant. Even if she wasn't a mutant, she would have been a magical being. So she comes from a long ancestors line of weather witch that goes straight from that started originated from Atlantis, the fabled civilization of Atlantis, and her ancestors were weather witches, throughout thousands of years ago. And to distinguish her as a magical being, all of her ancestors, I guess whoever, if they had the power, they had white hair and blue eyes. So I thought that was kind of neat. I didn't really even think about that, when I was reading the X Men. And so it's kind of funny because problem with the X Men is things get really confusing. I thought got really confusing when they start introducing parallel universe and time jumps. People from the future, trying to coming to the past to change the future and all that. So things started getting really complicated in the '90s. I thought, and that's when I pretty much stopped reading X Men. And for a while, X Men was like one of my favorite comic books. Fantastic Four and Spider Man was my favorites, but X Men was up there, especially during Paul Smith run on the Uncanny X Men. I thought Paul Smith was just absolutely fantastic. So Storm, her power is to control the weather, and I really don't know how she does it, but I'm sure they'll explain it. But she can control. She can make it rain. She can charge the atmosphere, so she can control lightning, and she can actually change the temperature, which I didn't really know, and she can control a lot of different stuff when it comes to weather. So yeah, so it does make sense that after she got her powers, she was worshipped as a goddess by the African tribes. So here's a funny, interesting thing about Storm, which I didn't know. Okay, actually, I just want to explain the face. So when I draw Storm's face, I often think of Pam Grier. So Pam Grier is this beautiful actress from the early '70s during the black exploitation film era, and I've always thought she was just absolutely stunning. She had, and she had this really high cheekbones, and just had like a regal bearing. And so every time I draw Storm, I actually often think about Pam Grier. So that's a little tip. So when I draw certain characters, I think of certain actors, and and once I have a certain actors in mind, the drawing comes easier. So that's a little thing that I like to I like to use. And Storm has that headgear. So she actually has like a little like a pick inside that headgear. So I remember the X Men where I think the X Men were caught by was captured by Magneto, and they were tied up in I think it was inside of a volcano headquarters or something like that. And then so even though she was tied up, Storm actually managed to knock her headgear off, and in her headgear she had like a little lockpick, and she was using her skill from her childhood where she was a pickpocket and a thief, and then she would basically had the pick had the lock pick in her mouth, and she was picking the lock that was binding her arms. I remember that was a pretty cool scene. Yeah, it was Claremont and drawn by John Byrne. John Byrne's run of X Men, which is absolutely fantastic. So there I'm drawing the classic Claremont costume. You can always tell Claremont, not Claremont, Dave Cockrum's costume. So by the way, Storm was created by Len Wein and Dave Cockrum. Her first appearance was Giant Size X Men #1, which came out in May of 1975. So you can always tell if a costume is designed by Dave Cockrum, because Dave Cockrum, every woman that he drew, they all had like a very similar look. They have like a thigh-high boots with a single piece bikini, not bikini, but a bathing suit, and a cape, and usually has a sash or something like that. But Storm actually has a cape. Yeah, so since I grew up reading X Men in the 80s, I decided to draw her in the classic 1980s costume, the classic Dave Cockrum's costume. So I'm actually taking a little bit of an artistic license and changing her cape a bit, because the uh, the corner ends of the cape is attached to her bracelet. So she has this kind of like a almost like a wing appearance, and very similar to the 1940s character Condor. So, but I thought attaching the cape to her bracelet would be a little bit awkward, so I just gave her just a regular cape. So there I'm shading in the cape. Yeah, I'm just right now I'm changing the radio. The music stopped. So usually when I'm drawing, I have the music blasting. I'm usually listening to music very loudly, or I'm listening to an audiobook. Or sometimes I would watch TV, but usually it has to be something that is very talky, like a drama. I love Law and Order. I always have, so if I'm watching TV while I'm drawing, it's usually Law and Order SUV, or any of those police dramas. The one that I just saw, I just finished, The Mentalist. So stuff like that. I've always been like a sucker for those police procedural drama, especially Law and Order. I love Law and Order. Yeah, so actually, right now I'm finishing out. I've been listening or watching slash listening to Magnum PI all 8 seasons, and after Magnum PI, I'm probably gonna go into a Quantum Leap. So yeah, so Dave Cockrum always have a very distinguished costume. Okay, here's a little bit of a tidbit that I did not know at all. I mean, it actually kind of I just like I didn't know this until recently. So Storm wasn't originally created as Storm. Storm was so when Len Wein and Dave Cockrum were creating the new X Men for the Giant Size X Men. Black Cat and Typhoon was the character that was going to be in the new Uncanny X Men, or the Giant Size X Men. And I guess during the creation, Black Cat eventually went to Spider Man. So if you look at Storm's appearance, there's a lot of Black Cat visual, costume visual elements. So you have the black suit, the white hair, and all that. And so, and here's another funny fact, which I didn't know. It was, I guess, the Marvel corporate heads wanted a more of a Marvel's corporate owners, Cadence Industry, suggested that the new X Men team should be more international, to appeal to more foreigners for whatever reason. And so that's why they incorporated a lot of different ethnic backgrounds for the new X Men. So you have Thunderbird, which is a Native American, and you have Wolverine, who's a Canadian, and you have Storm, or actually, I think his originally supposed to be a guy, a male character named Typhoon, but they thought there were too many guys, so they changed. They took elements of Black Cat and Typhoon, and then morphed it and did a sex change and made her, instead of a male, a female, and that's how Storm came to be. So the original character is supposed to be called Typhoon or something like that, and so it's actually kind of fascinating, which I didn't know. And then you have Colossus, who is a Russian, and you have Nightcrawler, who is a German, and you have Kitty Pryde, who is Jewish. So it's actually kind of is very fascinating that you know Marvel's Marvel's corporate owners suggested that Marvel create a more of a international team. So I thought it was kind of fascinating. I thought it was kind of cool, but I thought it was kind of fascinating. I wonder what the Typhoon character looked like. I'm actually kind of curious now. So so Storm also had a lot of different appearances, or they changed her appearances throughout throughout her run, and she went through like various costume change. And I remember the big costume change for me, this was like back in 80, 83, 83, 84, around there, was when Storm, 83, when Storm changed from her classic suit, classic costume, Dave Cockrum's costume, into this punk rock, mohawked punk rock costume. So this was back in 83, 84, which made a lot of sense because that was like the 18, Mr. T was a big rage and all that. So, and it was very jarring because like before then, all the characters were very feminine. So you had a lot of characters, all the female characters had long hair and very feminine dresses, very costumes. And then here comes Storm. She basically, she kind of had like a weird nervous breakdown. I mean, she would start losing her control over power, and I guess her self esteem was, her self confidence was crashing, and and then she kind of went a little crazy after that whole her adventure in Japan for Wolverine's wedding, and so she was it Yukio or something like that, was Wolverine's girlfriend. She was kind of a very impulsive, kind of a crazy woman, crazy Japanese ninja assassin. And so she basically opened Storm into basically just letting go. Stop. Don't be too uptight. Just to kind of let go. Just go with the flow, and kind of like And then so I guess Storm was going through this weird angst, and then and so like this is a very comic book trope. or movie trope too. When women they get upset, they always show women like cutting their hair. So that's what Storm did. Storm basically cut off all of her white hair and cut it into a mohawk, this just really big mohawk, and she basically got leather. She had leather pants, black leather jacket, black T-shirt, or was it white T-shirt, and with these like studded arm bracelets and studded collars, and biker boots and all that. So she went 180. So she went from this very classic feminine superhero costume with this billowing cape, and then she turned into a basically like a punk rocker. And I remember reading that as a kid. I was like, "Whoa, what happened here?" And and I wasn't a big fan. I wasn't a big fan of that look, but but it kind of grew on me, later on. It's like, okay, so she went through that phase, and so it kind of grew on me. And so yeah, so the more I actually read about Storm, the more she actually went through a lot as a character, and which is very interesting. I think she was one of the characters that had like a really deep and wide character growth. So later on, they kind of reconned her where she meets Black Panther as a kid, and eventually she marries Black Panther. And because and I drew that cover. I drew the cover for the marriage, the wedding of Black Panther and Storm, and which was a giant pain because they gave me some costume designer from the TV industry, uh, some, I guess, some famous guy or something like that. They sent me, yeah, here, this is Storm's wedding dress, and they sent me a reference of that, of the costume designer, this television industry costume designer sent me, and it was just terrible. It just didn't make any sense. It's one of those, they essentially draw like this weird stick figure, lollipop figure, with this like bunch of bright color, just like almost, it's very abstract art with colors and little highlights on it. And they said that's the costume. That's her wedding dress. And I remember I got that reference. I'm like going, I can't figure out how that works. And I understand it's interesting, visually interesting, but just from a real world making, a woman wear it just didn't work. So I actually had to go and redesign it, redesign huge elements of it to make the costume work, to have the costume actually stay on the body, and which kind of like annoyed the hell out of me, because I didn't, because I didn't get any credit for the costume eventually. And the TV industry guy, costume designer, he got all the accolades, and meanwhile I'm the one who actually did all the work and made it work. Got no mention whatsoever. But yeah, so it was like the guy was a designer, a really bad designer, and then I was essentially the engineer, take that blueprint and figure out how to actually make it work and exist in real life. So that was a that was a very interesting time drawing that cover. So anyway, so that the cover was a bit of a nightmare, because like I was under the gun because they're doing the Civil War. Everything was tied to Civil War at that time. So they said we need that cover right now so they can start promote the hell out of it. But it was a wraparound cover, and I'm like going, you're only giving me like literally like a couple of weeks to just nail this cover, and not even a few days to nail this cover, and then so I have to rush it, send it off to my colorist so he can color it, and then they could just promote it, just so it was a very very tight deadline, and I didn't even since it was a wraparound cover, I only managed to for the because of a limited time, I only did the front cover and sent that off to get it colored, and then I went and actually kind of retro drew the back cover, and again they didn't give me any time at all. So the original thing was they wanted to be like Neil Adams Superman versus Muhammad Ali cover with all the characters, recognizable in the crowd as they watched the wedding, and they gave me basically very very limited time, and so that was a nightmare. Yeah. So yeah, I'm just thinking about all the stress I was under. So there I am, just kind of like shading in the cape. At this point, I'm kind of like operating on I'm just like on pilot control, autopilot, just shading. And more shading. Yeah, so I like to once I shade that, I like to kind of rub it in, kind of make that to give it that softer that soft edge. Again, I didn't learn it from anywhere. It's just something I just kind of like picked up, especially when I'm drawing like a large black area. I like to just kind of like shade it and then just kind of rub the graphite in. So normally, if I'm inking this, like a lot of this would be just inked. There won't be any cross hatching. Actually, I think about it. I think a few years after the Black Panther and Storm wedding, they got divorced, or actually, it's more than that. It got annulled. The whole marriage got annulled. I don't know what caused the rift. I think it was like the Civil War. I think. Well, no, no, actually, I think I remember reading part of it. So I think X Men and Avengers got into a big fight, and Black Panther sided with Avengers, and Storm sided with X Men, and that caused like a big rift between Black Panther and Storm, between the husband and wife, and I'm not sure what the big rift was, but eventually that really pissed off Black Panther, so after the big X Men versus Avengers event, Black Panther wanted the wedding annulled, which kind of like destroys Storm. Actually, now I think about it, I mean, when I was reading the X Men, Storm was romantically linked with Forge. So Forge was this kind of like this Tony Stark kind of character, very tech guy. So I remember that. So I don't know what's going on with Storm now. I mean, I haven't picked up. I mean, I haven't read X Men in ages. You know. I mean, last time I read X Men was I was drawing A versus X, Avengers versus X Men run. That was like 10 years ago. So that was like the last time I read X Men. Man, time just flies. It really is kind of like when you have a when you have a comic book that runs for at this point 50 years. Yeah, it really is kind of tough to kind of keep the stories engaging and all that. But at the same times, you want to push the story forward and characters forward, but at the same time, you don't want to change any of the characters. The characters have to remain the same. Like Spider-Man. Like Spider-Man, he has to stay a certain age and he can't get married and have kids because that would just completely throw off the entire story. It will open new storylines, but in the long run, it just kind of it's not. It kind of hurts the overall brand. So I think that's the problem with X Men at this point. There's so much background history behind the X Men, so it gets a little bit too convoluted. So I decided to add the highlights by erasing the graphite out. And then just kind of adding the highlights in her midsection by erasing the highlights in. And then kind of smudge it to kind of soften the highlights a little bit. And then add that highlight. Go ahead and kind of like darken and the shades a little bit. Adding the little wrinkles. Erase the stray marks. Kind of reinforce the outline a little bit. Yeah, at this point the drawing's pretty much done. I'm just going in and just erasing some of the strayed marks. And there it is. Storm from the X Men. Hope you guys enjoyed it.